Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to. Man, is it only Tuesday? How is it only Tuesday? It feels like it must be later in the week. COVID time is weird, hey? Everything is compressed, but also stretched out, and it's bizarre. Time is bizarre. Let's see, so who's here? So Irene is here. Good morning, Irene. Adon is here. Good morning, Adon. And Michelle's here. Good morning. Oops, there we go. Good morning, Michelle. Let's hop back into ancient Greece. Sorry, I was just trying to make it sound epic. So, ancient Greece. Here we are. We're kind of easing into the classical period here, classical Athens. And so we talked a little bit yesterday. We watched some documentary. We read some of the text. And we kind of were outlining how democracy comes to Athens. And it's kind of right at the edge of the classical period. And as I mentioned, a lot of stuff is going to happen in this classical period. Again, it's a shockingly short period of history that has a shockingly large impact on really the rest of world history, right? Through the Romans and through other societies that were inspired by the Romans and the Greeks. This era of ancient history has a huge footprint. And again, it's shocking because there's lots of 200-year periods that nobody even knows anything about. But for some reason, this one has a lot of impact. We said that we're in Athens here, so you can see Athens on the map, kind of just to the north of the Peloponnese there. And Athens will eventually kind of gain control of all of the city-states that are kind of around it. But for now, it's just a little city-state. I think we saw this, I don't know, did they mention it in the video or not? Athens kind of starts out, it's a little polis, and there's really nothing special about Athens itself. It's a polis really like any other Greek polis. Yes, they're all unique, but good morning. Yes, they're all unique, but there's nothing really special about it until we kind of get this series of events that leads to a strange new form of governance in the city-state, right? And so we talked a little bit about tyrants yesterday. And our narrator in the documentary said it comes from a Near Eastern word tyrannos, right, and for ruler. And so again, initially the word doesn't really have a negative connotation, but over time it starts to pick up that negative connotation to it. Also, if you know your dinosaurs and you've heard of a Tyrannosaurus rex, the name comes from that as well. It's the tyrant lizard, tyrannos. And so they've used that same word. We hear about a tyrant here in ancient Athens called Pystratus, who kind of manages to elevate himself to power with public support. He comes into town with a girl that he met in the countryside and dresses her up, and she pretends to be Athena, saying that I support Pystratus as ruler of my city. I don't know if people actually believed in this or not. It seems hard to imagine that they would believe it. But either way, he does manage to gain power. And he actually does manage to be a reasonably good ruler of Athens for that period. He makes some administrative changes, some economic changes. And the result is that Athens becomes a major trading port. They start to export a lot of olive oil. And they start to make some cash, right? And again, if you're a politician and your people are making cash, they're going to like you, right? If they're not making cash, you're going to have a tough time gaining support. So Pystratus, even though he's an illegitimate ruler, he kind of comes to power in a very non-traditional way. He actually turns out to be not a bad leader, and he's generally good for Athens. His sons, however, do I have that in the last one? Yeah. His sons, however, are not so great. And often we see that sometimes when we have the father is a leader or the father is the owner of the business, and then sometimes the sons are kind of not so great and don't do such a good job. And here, the same thing happens. And so His sons Hippias and Hipparchus are both kind of awful tyrant rulers in the full kind of negative connotation. They are overthrown, and Athens brings in this noble person, Cleisthenes, to draft a new governance system for Athens. And like we said, he's kind of stuck initially, because if he gives power to the aristocrats, to the nobles, if he makes an oligarchy, they'll just keep fighting with each other, right? About who's more powerful and who has the upper hand. Some of them will be trying to make themselves a king, and then there'll be murders and, instability, and it's awful. It's not going to work, right? If he puts another king in power, well, kings can be good or bad. And so if you have a good king, things are great. And if you have a bad king, it's awful. Neither of those really work, right? And so Cleisthenes kind of comes up with an inspired decision. And again, it's not totally out of the blue, because there's lots of kind of historical undercurrents. There's lots of things happening in Athens where the people feel empowered, the people are becoming more wealthy, and they want more say in how their city-state runs. They are kind of inspired by these Homeric poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, but increasingly in this period, it's starting to feel like anyone can be a hero, right? So in the past, it's almost like only noble people can really be heroes, right? Heroism is not for the little people, for the normal people. But here in this period, the Greeks are starting to feel like, yeah, anyone can be a hero, right? Anyone can go out there and do something brave and do something with excellence. There's something that's not mentioned in the text, but it's this idea called Arete, right? It's excellence, that you can be excellent, right? Even as someone who makes clay pots, you can make excellent clay pots. And we actually saw that in the pictures, that some of those clay pots, they just had olive oil in them. That's it. But are those pots fantastic? Yeah, hand painted, right? Hand manufactured, and they're gorgeous, right? And potters used to compete with each other, right? So some of those pots, there's a little bit of writing, like a signature at the bottom, and it says, I, whatever my name is, Mike. I, Mike, made this pot, but I bet Baja couldn't have done it this well, right? So they're kind of trash talking each other on their pottery. They're competing with each other. And so again, there's this idea that you can be great regardless of where you are in society, right? Again, the Athenians are probably not too interested in monarchies anymore. They had a bad experience with Hippias and Hipparchus, and so they don't really want another single ruler. And so all of these things are kind of happening in the background. And so Cleisthenes looks at that and says, okay, we got to do something different here. And he does, right? He builds upon those reforms that Solon made earlier on in Athens history, and he gives people the power, right? Our narrator said that democracy comes from the word demos, the people, and kratos is a grip or power, right? The power is with the people, right? I'm just going to see, okay, 7, okay. So the superpower of the day, of course, we saw was the Persian Empire, right? And so Cyrus the Great, I guess he's militarily great. I don't know if he's great at other things, but Cyrus assembles a bit of an empire in sort of Central Asia, and they're the superpower of the day, right? Yesterday I said that it was Cyrus that attacked Greece, but I was wrong. It's Darius. His son Darius attacks the Athenians, that he is defeated, and it's his son Xerxes who comes back later to avenge. So I messed up a little bit. It's not Cyrus, it's his son Darius who's... Lydia. Oh, no, nope, not a typo. So yeah, it is Lydia. Some of these are kind of, some of these refer to earlier cultures or earlier names for places. So Lydia is kind of part of the Middle East that I don't think anyone uses that term anymore, but that's what it was called. The Medes are a group of people that lived in that area as well. And so, yeah. Again, we mentioned that the Greeks and the Athenians and the Persians had a bit of a misunderstanding, right? And so Darius thought that the Athenians had pledged loyalty to him and to the Persian Empire, but then the Athenians went and helped out one of their city-states in an overthrow of a Persian tyrant, right? And so Darius took exception to that, right? He was like, what's with these Athenians? They pledged loyalty to me, and now they're stabbing me in the back. Of course, they hadn't pledged loyalty, but there was a misunderstanding. So he brings his army to teach the Athenians a lesson, and whoops, accidentally gets defeated by the Athenians, right? And of course, the Spartans are there. No, the Spartans are later. Are they? No, that's Marathon. Okay. Am I? Right, no, yeah. So the Spartans are there, of course. There's this classic story of these 300 Spartans holding off the Persian Empire. And of course, they are defeated and they go home, right? Again, Xerxes will come back later to avenge his father's defeat. That's not going to go real well for him either, but we'll get to that. Yeah, so just a quick graphic of the Persian Empire. So yeah, this is a pretty big opponent to take on if you're little bitty Athens, right? But they do. We talked a little bit about the Agora, which is the center of Athens in classical times. And here you can see this is kind of a model of what it would have looked like, right? This big open square, some government buildings, but also a marketplace, right? A place where people could sell the things that they produced and trade. You could go there and eat and drink and go for a walk and shop and hang out and talk to people and argue about political things. This is kind of the town square, right? The center, the place where everybody goes. Yeah, just a little map of that. What was I trying to show here? I guess I was trying to show the area in which the Greeks are the areas that the Greeks are interacting with. And so here you can see there's a lot of movement, right? They're on the coast of Asia Minor here. That's where is it? That's Turkey for us in modern day, but it was Asia Minor at the time. You can see Lydia is there, and Lycia is there, and Phrygia. All of those areas the Greeks are interacting with. The Levant, which is now kind of Lebanon, Syria, Israel kind of area. There's Greeks there interacting. There's Greeks sailing to Egypt to trade all along the north coast of Africa, into Italy. The Greeks are everywhere, right? They're very, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, they travel around a lot. They sail around, they trade. They've got a big presence in the Mediterranean. We heard yesterday in the documentary about the Pnyx, right, which was an area in which people met and voted, right? And so there were, do I have a slide on it? Oh yeah, computer generation. There we go. Basically just a flat area, right? But they had early versions of politicians, orators, right? And these orators would get up there and argue a point, right? I think Athens should go to war with Sparta. Here's why, right? And then another person would get up and say, I don't think we should do that at all. I think that's a bad idea. Here's why. And again, if that sounds a little bit like the critical thinking stuff we were talking about, that's exactly what the Athenians were doing. They were making arguments in front of the people of Athens because everyone was going to vote on this, right? And whether we go to war with Sparta or not is dependent on how people vote. And how people vote is dependent on the arguments that are presented to them, right? And so some people got up here and were very, very good at arguing their case, right? About presenting good arguments and good evidence to the people of Athens. We saw some technology that people used for their democracy yesterday. We saw ballot boxes And we saw these little ballots, and again, we saw they're very cleverly constructed because the yes has a little divot in the end and no doesn't, right? And so when you walk up to drop your ballot in, nobody can see how you're voting, right? And you only know once all the votes are counted up, and then you know if it's a yes or no, or a guilty or a not guilty. But it's some clever technology.
So they pay for it, or do place tickets?
Either one, I think. You'd walk by and just kind of drop it in, I think.
What about if they change the
No, it's not like there's two separate ones. So you would have like a yes and a no, and you would throw your yes in there, or throw your no in there. Yeah. And we also saw these Claritarians, right? Which again is a very clever way to randomly select jurors or magistrates or whatever you need. You just stick your little name tag in the slot, they pour some marbles down the tube, and whichever white ones line up, that's who gets chosen, right? Impossible to know who will be chosen. It's entirely random. And again, it makes it difficult it ensures that the randomness of choice. And again, if you have a jury in a law court, it makes it very difficult to bribe the jurors when you don't know who the jurors are going to be until the trial has already started. And by then, it's kind of too late. And as I mentioned a little bit later on, the Athenians will start having really big juries of like 500 people. So again, who can bribe a jury of 500 people, right? Impossible, especially if you don't even know who they are until the day of the trial. So there's a lot of attempts to keep things fair, right? To keep things entirely random. So there's a few different parts of Athens democracy here, which I think I've got a slide. We don't really have to know these in too much detail, but it's not a bad idea to just know that there's an assembly of kind of the majority of people. There's a smaller council of 500 that is sort of running the state on a day-to-day basis. And then there is the court system, right, that hears cases and gives verdicts, guilty or not guilty, right? And so, to be a member of the Council of 500, you of course have to be a male and a property owner and an Athenian citizen. So really not everyone in Athens is part of the government. Democracy is supposed to be about the people, but it's not all people, right? But even so, for the ancient world, this is still revolutionary, right? The idea that the regular people will govern themselves, not the king or the pharaoh or some sort of military leader, right? This is still revolutionary, even though it's not very equal, right? What did we? So, question number 8: what did we learn about the role of women in ancient Athens? Mm-hmm. In many cases, they were almost kind of the property of men, right? Either of their fathers or of their husbands. What else did we learn? Some of them were leaders. You would definitely see women in positions of power, but mostly in the religious sphere, right? So the oracle of Apollo at Delphi, the oracle she's a woman, right? She speaks for the god. And again, we had this interesting kind of dichotomy of, there are female gods that are worshipped, but also females in society are kind of very tightly controlled, right? And that's a weird juxtaposition, I guess, or kind of dual consciousness about women, right? As revered, but also tightly controlled by men, right? But again, I said often cultures are capable of, having double standards about things without too much difficulty, and that's one of them. What else do we learn about women? Yeah, so there was the idea that yeah, women were supposed to be modest, right? They were supposed to shield themselves from the eyes of other men. And so yeah, we see this in pottery and in artwork where women's heads are covered, right? And sometimes even their faces are covered. Anything else?
But how come they're not torturous and ugly and
Say that again.
educated? But how come they're not described in the history, not as terrorists, not as stupid, not as not educated?
Women or face coverings?
No, women. I mean, the one who used to cover themselves. As now in the modern days, the Muslim, or the Muslim woman, when she covers her hair, oh no, she's uneducated, she's terrorist. How come?
Because those are entirely different stereotypes created in entirely different times by different countries for different reasons. And so, yeah, that has to do with, yeah, it's interesting because the only thing that's really similar about those two things is the idea that women cover themselves for some reason. But
For the same reason. For their
yeah,
own.
yeah, for the sort of modesty and for the eyes of their men of their family, right? Yeah, so the same kind of basic reason, but all of the stuff around that has to do with racism and religious oppression and who's the dominant culture in society, globally, and who isn't. And here amongst the Greeks, we're kind of just hearing about the Greeks from the Greek point of view. But the other thing we should say too is that idea of women covering themselves in Athens, that wasn't the case in all Greek city-states. And in fact, the Spartan women didn't do that at all. Spartan women walked around freely, uncovered with their hair in the wind kind of thing. They were encouraged to, stay fit and to work hard and to participate in athletics. And so women in Sparta had a lot of freedom because Sparta was interested in strong, powerful Spartans. And you know who makes strong, powerful Spartans? Yeah, strong, powerful Spartan mothers, right? So Sparta had a lot of kind of respect for its women, not that Athens didn't, but they kind of thought about things very differently. And again, like I said, living in one polis is not the same as living in another. And so here in Athens, you have these women kind of going around covering themselves, and in Sparta, they're kind of walking around freely. Walking around kind of freely and independently. And so, yeah, there's these kind of ideas about what it is to be Greek, but there's also particular ideas about living in each city-state. Each city-state is kind of, in some ways, it's kind of its own world. And so, again, you'd see women covering themselves in Athens, definitely not in Sparta, but it's...
What do you say about women in Athens? They're not working freely and independently?
That they're not...
We never heard of that, right?
Yeah, so we definitely know that they are occupying kind of a subordinate position in society, the Athenian women. So they're not part of the political system. They're usually not part of the economic system, although sometimes they could own property. They could go to court, but they had to be escorted by a man. What else? What else do I know about women? They were definitely not in an equal position in terms of economic or social power with men. They definitely had less. You could say that. Sorry, I forgot what your question was.
I said that how we can judge they're not working freely and independently as only for women like that.
How can we judge them?
As not like, as you said, like women in Sparta, they're more working more freely, more independently.
Yeah,
How we can say that women in Athens are not.
it's true. And part of that has to do with that's a cultural value, that's a cultural bias, right? And so, I have to, good morning. I have to wear pants every day, do I not? Yeah, well, no, I don't think I don't think I can come in here without any pants, can I? No, I don't mean shorts. I mean like no pants. Can I do that? No, I have to wear pants every day, right? Because that's what we do in society. We wear pants. We don't walk around with no pants, right? Am I oppressed? Yeah, so it has to do with cultural values, right? So again, is the covering of a woman's head in ancient Athens or in any modern country we might want to choose, is it oppression or is it simply this is the way people dress, right? And again, it depends a lot on the eye of the beholder, right? Of who's looking at it. So again, I have to wear pants every day. Am I oppressed? Well, most people would say no. But maybe a culture that doesn't wear any pants would look at me and say, gosh, that must be horrible having to wear those pants every day. So restrictive, you know? We like to be free and loose, you know? So again, I'm being a little bit silly about it. But again, a lot of times those ideas are filtered through the sort of cultural lens of who's ever looking, right? But you could make, there's a few arguments to make on that, one way or the other, and it has to do with culture, it has to do with which culture is looking, and it has to do with the context around it, right? And so here in Athens, the fact that women cover their hair and sometimes their face doesn't necessarily mean that they are oppressed and unequal. However, we do know in ancient Athens that they were, in fact, not equal to men in other ways. Whether that covering is part of that oppression or not, that's kind of another story. Yeah, that's complicated. Do we know anything else about women in ancient Athens? Couldn't vote, couldn't really participate in politics. Yeah, there's definitely no. This is a society in which sexual activity is going to be tightly controlled, right? So no sex before marriage, no sex outside of marriage. Athenian citizenship is important, right? Did it talk about that in the textbook a little bit? About the control of sexuality versus Athens versus Sparta? Yeah. So a man who wasn't married, or a man who was married to a woman who couldn't have children, he could actually ask permission to have sex with another guy's wife, so that he could have children, right? And if it's okay with the husband, then it's fine, because the goal is to create more strong Spartan soldiers, right? So, you know, sexual activity is kind of filtered through what's good for the city-state. And it's the same thing with Athens, right? It has to do with maintaining, restricting Athenian citizenship, right? To only people who have Athenian mothers and fathers. Yeah, weird. At least, according to our standards. Oh boy, we talked about orators. I think I answered that one already. Oh, right. So at one point, the Athenians discover a bunch of silver in their territory, right? So they basically win the lottery of the ancient world. They find a ton of silver in their territory. What do they do with that? What's that? They're already involved in trading, but yeah, they definitely trade the silver. But what do they do with the cash? What do they do with the money? They build stuff. What kind of stuff do they build? Huh? Well, yeah, but yeah, they build. Where's my picture? Yeah, they build these things. What do they call them? swear I'm going to start putting booze in this. Or maybe there already is. No, there isn't. Well, what do they call these? They are warships. Starts with a T. S. What's in the middle? They're triremes is what they are, right? Triremes are they're three because they had 3 levels of oars. And so these ships aren't necessarily, they don't carry cargo, they don't trade with them. They're like a fighter jet of the ancient world, right? So imagine a fighter jet like from that new Top Gun movie that's coming out. Those planes aren't for commuters, they're not for going on vacation. They are weapons of war, right? And that's what the Athenians build here. They build weapons of war. And I know it probably doesn't look very intimidating here, but there are hundreds of rowers below the decks that are rowing in sync, right? So you've got a few hundred men at the oars. You've got a drummer up there beating a drum beat so that everyone rows at the same tempo. You've got some people at the back steering this thing with 2 rudders, and at the front you've got an eye, of course, and you've got a little crest. But you see that thing that's close to the water? That is a bronze battering ram. And so this ship is a missile, right? You point it at the side of the enemy boat and you row as fast as you possibly can, and you tear through the other boat and sink it. That's what this thing is for. It's not for anything else. And they're very fast, they're very maneuverable, and the Greeks get really good at handling them. And so again, they can clip along in these things really quickly, ram an enemy boat, and then reverse the oars and pull themselves out, and the enemy boat sinks. They are deadly. And I know they don't look like, what's that? They do look cute with the little eye, right? But, for ancient naval warfare, these things are not cute. They'll take you down. A number of years ago now. What's that? Well, they built a replica of one a number of years ago, and so this is in Greece. They built a trireme replica. They got a bunch of people rowing that and tried to figure it out, and it's pretty cool. And they really move because they don't draw a lot of water, so there's not a lot of them under the surface, and so again, they're really quick. They've got a lot of oars, and again, if you get your crew well rehearsed and well trained, and everyone's rowing at the same time, these things are absolutely deadly. And again, spoiler alert, they're going to help the Athenians defeat the Persians a second time. Maybe not so much spoiler alert, because we heard about that, right? We said that they spent that money on silver. No, they spent that silver money on the triremes because Themistocles, who's a Athenian general, he's really worried that the Persians are coming back, right? This is his fear the whole time. This is what keeps Themistocles up at night, is that one day the Persians are going to come back. And they came once, and we were lucky, right? They weren't prepared. We had a lucky battle. We defeated the Persians and sent them home with their tail between their legs. But they're coming back. And when they come back, we may not be lucky again. We've got to be ready.
Why do you have a general you said they didn't have
Well, they do have people that are kind of in charge of military affairs. It's a magistracy. It's a magistrate. So you would elect people to, somebody's got to give the orders, right? Somebody's got to give the orders in the army. So they don't have a standing army, but they do have people that are in charge of military matters. And Themistocles is one of these. And so again, he's very worried that the Persians are going to come back, and he's worried that when they do, the Athenians they may not be lucky again. They'll have to be prepared. And so when they discover all of that silver, Themistocles gets up there in the Pnyx and says, listen, people, we need to be prepared. This is where we should spend our money. We should build ships. And fortunately for the Athenians, it pays off, because the the Persians do come back, and fortunately, the Athenians are ready to meet them. But I think we'll see that today. Right. Okay. So that kind of sets us up for where we are today, the return of the big bad Persians. I guess it's a bit of a spoiler alert. The Athenians' victory due for Athens. I guess we know that the Athenians win, but maybe you guessed that. They'll talk a little bit about the Delian League, so we'll hear about that and how Athens benefited, and then we'll hear a little bit about the Parthenon. Okay, so this is kind of we're getting into a glory, sort of a golden age period of Athens, where Athens is rich, successful, powerful, things are going really well. There's all kinds of intellectual thought happening. It's a pretty exciting time to be alive in Athens if you're an Athenian, because things are going really well for them. So let's watch. Online people, as you can see, I'll ask you to watch from 28:45 to 45:31, which I know is kind of a weird timestamp, but that's okay. I'll get you to watch that. We'll do the same here, and then maybe what we'll do is after we watch, we'll take our break, and then we'll come back and talk about what we've seen. Okay, so the link is still in Microsoft Teams for online people, so I'll turn you loose to watch that. Then take a break, and then we'll come back and talk. Okay, so we'll see you in just a little bit. What?
Became rich.
Yeah, so there's this, how do we say it? Maybe it's not an ideology, or maybe it's the beginning of an ideology, but the Athenians almost have this idea that, hey, why did we win? Well, because our system of governance is better than theirs, right? So there's a little bit of, they won because of strategy, right? The Greeks were clever. They had a clever strategy. They won because of technology. They had the ships, they had the technology, but also they felt that somehow there must have been something that set them apart, right? There's some reason why they won. What's the X factor? And the Athenians start to see the X factor as them, right? It's the fact that their democracy, their way of running a city-state, that's what gave them the edge. Democracy gave them the edge. And so they kind of start seeing themselves as, I don't know, what would you say, special, or they kind of get a very inflated sense of themselves, I think, right? As being, not only were they, they won because of good strategy and good technology, but they also won because somehow they are special, or better than the others, right? Well, that's what's very interesting. What is hubris again? Yeah, that super inflated ego. We said in lots of Greek myths, there's this element of hubris, right? The main character thinks he's better than the gods, or thinks he's better than everyone else, and then it all ends in tears, right? The gods do not like it when people think that they are better than them. But it almost seems that that's what the Athenians are starting to become guilty of, right? They're almost starting to think that they're better than anyone else, that they're superior. What's this Delian League thing? It's that alliance, right? So the Athenians partner with all of these other city-states. Why do they call it the Delian League? Yeah, the island where Apollo and Artemis are said to be born is called Delos. That's where they have the treasury. That's where they keep all the cash for this Delian League to pay for ships and things like that. But what kind of happens over time? Kind of, right? Athens becomes the most powerful player. And so it's supposed to be an alliance of equals, right? A bunch of city-states allied together against the Persians. But what you're supposed to do in the Delian League is you're supposed to contribute ships, right? So every city-state contributes 5 ships and a crew of rowers every year. That's what it's like NATO in a way. But everybody has to contribute a little bit. But some of the smaller city-states find that they don't have enough people to contribute rowers, or they don't have the expertise to build the ships or stuff like that. And so what they start doing is eventually they just start giving Athens money. And they're like, here's some money, you build the ships, you find the rowers, we'll just pay for it, right? And so what starts to happen is that all of these ships start to be built and controlled by Athens, while all these other city-states are giving them money, basically. And so Athens starts to become kind of the head of the Delian League, money pouring into their treasury, into their bank account, and they kind of become the leader, and not a leader, not a supportive leader, but almost like, we're protecting all you city-states, so keep the money coming, and if you don't keep the money coming, we're going to use our warships to make sure that you send your payment. So they start coercing payment out of these other city-states, whether they like it or not.
Were the Spartans also doing?
No, Spartans weren't involved in this. The Spartans are kind of notoriously isolationist. So for the most part, the Spartans don't get involved in other things that are going on in the Greek world. Sometimes they get lured into a fight for various reasons, but usually they kind of keep to themselves, and they're not too they don't get involved in a lot of things. So the Spartans aren't part of it. So Athens kind of builds itself almost like a little empire, and it's not supposed to be an empire, it's supposed to be an alliance. But the Athenians start to kind of abuse their power within the league because all of the ships and rowing crews are theirs, and people are sending them all kinds of money. And so what do they start doing with this money? Well, yeah, they maintain their navy for sure. But what else do they do? Yeah, they start to spend it. They start to spend that money on Athens, right? That money is supposed to be for ships and rowing crews. It's for the Delian League. But Athens starts to spend it on beautifying itself, right? And Pericles is part of that. Oh yeah, I've got some artwork here of the Battle of Salamis. Do I have some pictures? Hang on. I guess I don't. Maybe I have some pictures later. So the Athenians start beautifying their city, right? They start building temples and porticos. They build this entire complex on top of the Acropolis, right? The Acropolis is that kind of flat-topped mountain in the middle of Athens. Acro is Greek for high, polis is the city, right? So the Acropolis is the high city, if you will. And so on top of that area, they build a temple of Athena, which is quite massive and beautiful. But they also build a number of other buildings, and they use it as kind of a treasury and storehouse for all of their riches, right? So again, the Athenians kind of start abusing their power a little bit, and kind of start to dominate these other members of the Delian League. I wanted to take a pause so far, and this documentary has an argument to make, right? This documentary isn't just a bunch of facts. She's trying to convince us of something. Bethany is. What's her argument, do you think? What is she trying to convince us of here? I think that's part of it, right? That we, and she starts off with that, right? She says we've whitewashed Athenian history. We sort of think about it the way we want to think about it, right? We've created sort of a fantasy about what democratic Athens was actually like. What else might she be arguing in a similar vein? Yeah, we here in the West anyway, we hold democracy up as this highest ideal, right? But Bethany is kind of saying, well, democracy is great and all that, but it really depends on what the values are beneath it, right? Because what kind of things are Athens doing that are kind of not very morally correct or praiseworthy? What kind of bad things are the Athenians doing? Well, there's the woman thing. That's probably more cultural than anything else. But what else is there? What were they doing on Euboea, that island of Euboea? Yeah, no, not that one. But what? Yeah, so Euboea is an island with a lot of agricultural production, right? A lot of farmland, right? And so what did they do? They took over Euboea. They took all the people who lived on Euboea and shipped them out, and they put a bunch of Athenians there to farm and to collect the grain, right? That doesn't sound like a very ethical thing to do, to just take over a part of the Greek world and ship everybody out and keep all of the grain. That seems like theft of land, right? Yeah, so she's kind of, I think, trying to make the point that, yeah, democracy is great, but democracies can still do bad things, right? If people are making bad choices, or if they're not kind of upholding their values or not thinking about their values, then yeah, democracy can do a bad thing, right? And so I think that's what she's trying to argue anyway. We'll see maybe when we get to the end. So what does this Parthenon thing represent? So all of these, this big temple and all of these fancy buildings and riches on top of the Acropolis in Athens, what do they kind of represent? The aristocracy of Athens. I would say yes, but I would say the aristocracy in terms of Athens as the aristocracy of the entire Greek world. Yeah. The idea that Athens is the head of the Greek world, the most powerful city in the Greek world, and therefore it should look that way, right? It should look incredible. And so, yeah, Pericles, who's a politician of the time, starts to get money diverted to all of these things, right? The Acropolis, I think, gosh, I had some data on this before, but I think that in today's dollars, if you could convert them, the ancient Athenians spent $3 billion on building the Parthenon. Can you imagine us spending $3 billion on a building? Like, yeah, very few buildings even get close to that cost. I'm sure even the Burj Khalifa it's in Dubai, right? Yeah, I don't even think that building costs $3 billion, and yet the Athenians spent the equivalent of $3 billion on the Temple of Athena. So unbelievable, right? 1.5 billion? Right. So the ancient Athenians spent twice that on their building. We have better technology, it's true, but still, that's a lot of money to put into a building, is it not? No, definitely not. But it's a big investment for the time. And it's especially big investment seeing as, at least the Burj Khalifa, it turns a profit, right? It's a hotel. People rent rooms there. Plus, what's that? Yeah, and there's restaurants. Plus, people can actually enter it. The Temple of Athena, most people probably never entered it, right? It wasn't a church like we kind of might be familiar with today, where everybody goes in. Greek temples were not for everyone to go in. So you had this giant building to Athena that probably only a few priests ever went in, and yet $3 billion of investment. That is a lot of investment for the ancient world, with money that arguably did not belong to them. Right? Let me just see here. We're here. Jump ahead a little bit. Salamis. Oh yeah. So this is the last thing we'll do today. I wanted to just take a quick look at the life of an ancient Athenian in terms of what the lives might have been like for young men or young boys, what young girls' lives might have been like. I want you to pay attention in this video to what aspects of Athenian democracy that we see, and what kind of aspects of social life do we see. So I'm just going to pop this into Microsoft Teams here, so just bear with me for one quick second while I do that. And this will be the last thing we do today, of course. So online people, I'm going to sign you off in just a second. and we'll see you tomorrow, and we'll talk about this video, and we'll watch it in class here too. So for online people, the link is in Microsoft Teams. I will watch the video, answer the questions. We'll talk about this first thing tomorrow, and I will see you then. Okay, so bye-bye. Have a nice afternoon. We'll talk about this tomorrow.